Hunter, this is Evan. We're here for some kind of very informal, unrehearsed, unplanned fireside chat-ish thing with no fire about physics animation in games. As you might know, Hunter, also known as Punches Bears on Twitter, does a lot of cool GIFs and prototypes and has a lot of like really advanced techniques for animating characters with physics. I'm currently working on a game called Ruan, which is a VR gladiator combat game, which is on display there, which is also exclusively uses physics-driven animation. And Evan has, well, besides general jousting, several other prototypes: Super Wolfenstein, Scumbags, Cricket to an extent, Cricket, which is on display here. And I think we all feel that this kind of physics-driven animation is a really unfair advantage now that indies have. And it's a kind of like low-cost, high-yield way of doing, of animating characters and getting stuff out of it that not enough people are doing, and then we kind of want to encourage more people to experiment with. So we did zero rehearse, but Evan has something to say, so I think I'll get to it now.
I wanted to say, so indies have this, you can say indies have this advantage. In truth, I think there's a number of AAAs that have developed physics animation techniques that are perhaps more advanced than anything we're showing, but they're using it for very different purposes. Their goal is for realism. They're making FIFA driven by physics, or at least follow physics very closely, or they're making huge hordes of zombies because the zombies can now fall over and it looks really good in that. But they're using it for a different reason to what we're using it for. Like as Ruan said, the strength here is that you can get something that behaves in a coherent fashion really, really quickly with physics. It's fun to play with out of the box because the systems interact well with each other, and that's it becomes kind of a rapid prototyping tool that is quite extensible to a full game that can be very appealing.
I want to actually ask Hunter, because I didn't know this, like, how did you start experimenting with that kind of physical animation? Like, what led you to your first couple of prototypes?
So it was probably right around the time of Gang Beast. You guys know of Gang Beast? It's pretty infamous in the indie scene. But the time came where I had to either learn how to animate for real, or I had to just figure it out with physics. And I did the approach, you guys have probably seen this, where you have a keyframed animation and you can kind of blend in physics. However, there was a few pretty significant problems that I just couldn't get around. So, have you guys heard of Calvin and Hobbes comic strip? Yeah, everybody? So there's a scene in Calvin and Hobbes, and this was kind of what I wanted to start with. So there's a scene where Calvin's coming home, he opens the door, and Hobbes busts through the door, and they're like flipping around on the ground, and there's like little stars and little, things, little scuffle clouds, right? So I wanted to be able to do that, and I started trying to do it with regular keyframed animations, and you can get it to work. It's just going to look the same every time.
It would probably take weeks to get one animation that runs in the same way every time.
Yeah, and it would be boring.
And if you, so the issue is as well, after you've done it, maybe you can start getting set up just so we can actually show people some clips. It's just maybe a more direct way of showing what we're meaning. So with the traditional animation, the character follows the same animation every time. With physics, you don't have as much control, but they respond dynamically to the environment and other actors. So I think, Hunter, do you want to show a clip or two? I think you brought.
Sure. Yeah, and there's an overarching philosophy behind the physics animation that I think we probably all agree with. And with animation, it's, a lot of people like to know what's going to happen, but if you're using physics animation, you kind of want to just let the physics engine be the animator and surprise you, right? Because you don't want to see that same thing every single time. So that's kind of my philosophy, is I want to be surprised by what's going to happen. Within reason, you need to kind of control it to an extent. However, you don't want it to look the same every time. That's the whole point of this. So let me show you guys a few clips to familiarize with what we're talking about. I've just got different GIFs that I'm going to show. A lot of these do have music, so it starts.
I want to actually just quickly add, like, GIFs are very good in game development, and every physics-driven game GIFs really well. Like, it's really easy to make an awesome GIF of some kind of physics animation.
Yeah, and more times than not, you're gonna screw something up, and you're gonna have a ragdoll go crazy, and everyone loves that. So there's this threshold of it's working like it should, and it's going insane, and you want to be somewhere right there in the middle, because it's going to be interesting, it's going to be funny. All right, so people call me the bear guy all the time. This clip here. All right. Okay, so these bears are all driven by just physics forces. And so what I did is okay, there we go. So what I did here is everything is driven by just physics forces, which let me wire it into a frequency analysis tool. So when it's doing beat detection and on the beat, it bobs up and down, and then I can control like the other things. It's super janky and it's stupid, but that's why people love it.
So what I want to like point out about this while we're doing it is, so this is just a ragdoll. Like, people who play and make games are very familiar with ragdolls, and then it's just like forces applied to different parts at different times. But just because it is a coherent simulation by the computer, you get a lot of effects out of it for free. So you can see like those Disney animation principles of like lead in and follow through of an action, and the anticipation just naturally have to happen because it is an actual motion that's simulated. It's not a drawing that's pretending to be an animation. So we're like, just to get like natural bounce with the bear like lifting his head on the like upstroke is like, it takes a really skilled animator to do that. You can see the way his like head bobs. It takes like a skilled animator to do that by a traditional animation, but this is all just the physics and engine simulating it. I mean, it still takes some like tweaking to get it there, but once it's like once your forces are in the correct ranges, you just get all that like animation work done for you for free in any context, not just for one animation.
Yeah, and it's weird because I never thought of myself as an animator. And I still have a little bit of a problem with that because I'm a programmer, right? Like, I'm not trained as an animator. I don't know if any of you guys are. And I would have a really hard time making this with traditional keyframed animation. So that's why I get called the bear guy, because I got a lot of bear GIFs. A lot of these come from prototypes based on games that I'm working on. So the bear character is part of a couple different game ideas. I think you guys saw Bear Rodeo a long time ago. So I made a game called Naked Danny DeVito Power Rodeo 2. And it's Danny DeVito and he's naked and he's on a bear and it's a rodeo. I probably have a clip in here somewhere. It's artwork. Here's Molly riding the bear. Yeah. All right. So let me show you a couple other things. A lot of times things do not go correctly. So this was when I was trying to get climbing working. So like the little girl can go and like climb on the bear's back and sit on his shoulders. But I made some kind of like orbiting algorithm or something. But the thing is, like, you don't want to just throw that away. You could probably use that for something. I don't know what. But a lot of times I screw things up and I have to like make a note to go back and use it for some other mechanic somewhere. Walk cycles. So walk cycles in physics is a bitch, and all three of us up here, we all do it differently.
One of the easiest ways is just to pretend your character's drunk. You just put the bad walk cycle into the theme of the game.
That is where this came from. This is a burrito. This is Burrito Quest. It's about a guy who's had a little too much to drink. It's just a prototype, but the red thing is the burrito. It's a really fun prototype, and I need to finish that. But yes, you're right. If you want to make them look drunk, it's great for that. So, what if you want to make it look a little bit more real? You can get a lot of character out of physics animations, more so, in my opinion, than traditional keyframed animations. You just couldn't do this if it was hardwired keyframes. There's a lot going on here. I'm going to talk a little bit about my animation framework that I made, but in my opinion, that's super cute. Oh yeah. Okay. But the physics animations, if you get them just right, they can be super cute. So here's Molly jumping around like a little bunny rabbit. The outfit she's wearing is her bear catching outfit. So she's got a punching, a boxing glove, and then like an oven mitt. So she could like grab the teeth or something, I don't know. Okay, a couple other things. Oh God. I was telling you guys about this. So I got pissed off about Trump, and I was like, I'm gonna make a game about that idiot shaking hands. I'm gonna have to alpha male him with a handshake, right? But I got halfway through it, and I got tired of looking at his stupid face, and I just quit. Okay, a couple of things. So I'm working on a game right now that has little raccoons, and you can run around, you knock over trash cans, you steal things, and you just be an asshole in general. It'll be multiplayer, so you can cooperate with other folks. But there's, it's a little bit challenging. So I tried to do the whole 3 raccoons in a trench coat, 3 raccoons in a trench coat come in. And I got the 3 raccoons, I got that part working. I'm still working on how to do the trench coat. But with this, if you got 3 players, any one of them can go and jump on top of the other. It's not like you got to do it in a certain order or anything like that. But so far it works pretty good. Yeah, so there's going to be different things in the raccoon game that all physics, jumping around. I built kind of a little climbing system. You'll be able to fight and wrestle. So here's me working on some raccoon wrestling.
Why the pasta strainer?
Oh. So yeah, I posted a. Yeah, so I posted this, and I had this little colander for something else I was working on. I don't remember what. You know what? Let's just throw it on there. He found it in the trash. So in this game, they'll get different little hats and outfits and whatever based on what you find in the trash. And so I have done a little bit of VR, and we were talking a little bit about this. Was that last night? This is a really funny Korean girl, and she was just having a blast. This is a prototype I made called Hipster Toss. So in Hipster Toss, you're in a coffee shop, and you're throwing hipsters around. I altered this idea a little bit. The idea now, I've got it maybe about halfway done, but you're in an Apple store, and it's the new like iPhone whatever release, and when the door opens, all these consumers come in, and you have to shoot products at them. Like you shoot them in the head with a iPad or something like that, and then for them to pay, you like pick them up and just shake all the money out of them. The other VR stuff that I helped out a little bit with a VR project called Life of Us. It actually ended up winning, I think, at Sundance for Best VR. It's easy. It's easier to do like goofy physics animations, but I started to think like how to do just like elegant and sophisticated, and not just like the goofy drunk walk. So these are a couple of the characters that are in the game, and physics animation is just it's just made for this kind of stuff. So everything's super fluid. These little tadpoles, they swim around. They're like player controllable and stuff like that. But physics animation is just, it's made for stuff like this. Okay, so that's just some of the good. What is this?
Oh, that's really impressive. That's like photoreal.
I've been doing a lot of raccoon research. This little dude, he's just such a little asshole. He threw that little cake pan on the floor, and he just like looks at you.
He's looking for a pasta strainer.
So that's just some of the stuff that I'm working on. How many people here are animators? How many people here are programmers? Okay. So I would like to show you a little bit more technical. I'm not going to get into like actual programming stuff, coding stuff, but I'm going to show you a couple things that might help you kind of visualize what I'm doing. While I'm showing this, I want you guys to chime in and...
Well, I actually have a question here just about your process. You do something that's maybe a bit different to what, say, Ruan did, and to some extent what I do, in that you're making these little vignettes of physics animations. You put a bear in, you've got some bear animations. You're cobbling together scenes with pieces that you've already made, and you're exploring things very rapidly that way. Is this something you fell into or are doing by design? And as far as I can see, it looks like you're set up to do this really well with the physics animations you have.
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to avoid, and I think is probably super important for all of us, is I did not want to get locked into a multiple-year project. Because I've got a lot of ideas. I've got like 5 or 6 other game ideas, and any one of those could take a couple years, right? So the technology that I built, I've kind of been doing in stages. So started with like a humanoid. Let's get humanoids working, and then I would prototype a couple of the ideas to make sure it was going to work. Then I'd throw a bear in the mix. The name Punches Bears comes from one of the original prototypes that I was working on. I was going through a Danny DeVito phase. And that prototype was, there's a garbage can, and a bear walks up to the garbage can, and Danny DeVito walks up to the garbage can, and they just like duke it out over a sandwich that's sitting in the garbage can. Sandwiches sit on the top. And so you had to actually like wrestle a bear and punch him and all that kind of stuff. So the technology that I put together, I make these, once I get it working, I'll make a couple of the different characters or scenes or ideas that I have just to make sure it's going to look okay and work right. I use Twitter as kind of a hive mind for feedback and a lot of times ideas. So like the game I'm working on now is called Raccoons. because I posted, hey guys, I'm picking out a name today or tomorrow. There's another game name I really like called Trash Pandemonium, and I said, let me know if you got anything better. And like a couple people suggested raccoons. So, you know, I started all of the, you know, legal stuff to make sure I could actually use it. But what it's good for is, like, I'm a one-person studio. It's just me. I do everything from modeling, programming. If you see it on there, I had to do it. So it gets a little, I don't know, you get kind of isolated. Like, do any of you guys work alone? Yeah, some of you. Yeah, so you know, you start to kind of lose your mind after a while. The Shining kind of thing. And then also you get kind of, getting feedback from people helps you develop ideas and all that. So Twitter is great for that kind of stuff. I'm happy that people like the stuff that I do, but even if I didn't have like a ton of people on Twitter sending me nice notes, I'd still be doing this just because I really like it. It is super helpful though. Let me show you a couple of the technical things. So one of the big things, this is a wireframe of the bear walking around. One of the things where we probably differ in how we're doing this, but this is mass distribution. You can barely see it. Actually, can we kill the lights? Is that the
what are those circles like kind of mass? Is the gray spheres, what are those represent? Center of mass or something.
So the spheres, okay, so the spheres that you see are the mass of that body part. So the big one is the hips. So it's the mass of the body part as a percentage of the whole mass. So if the whole mass of the bear is 100.
Yeah, it's all concentrated in the pelvis for the
right.
bear.
And this is super important if you're doing physics animations, because when you start moving things, if the head weighed as much as the hips, then, you know, just imagine like if in real life your head was 100 pounds.
Kilograms.
Right? Yeah, it'd be super hard to walk and control yourself and all that stuff.
I find it interesting because I think my weight distributions are way more realistic. I think I noticed just now in seeing hipster toss the way the arms move, it looks like your arms are way lighter than generally I would put in for arms. Because you can see, like, I mean, there's like a specific kind of movement that the arms make. Can you go back to that hipster toss when he gets knocked back and his arms like fly around? His arms are clearly very light compared to the rest of his body.
So in the case of Gorn, you needed the arms to be heavy because they needed to have an effect on the world when they hit things, and that's really what a lot of where the mass distribution matters was how much will this thing affect other things when it moves. And I mean, people have a sense of this naturally. Like, if a hand looks wrong, it's going to look wrong. But there's aesthetics about it as well.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, and that's what can be insanely frustrating about physics animations, is that when you move a body part, it moves all the other body parts, and if the other body parts are heavier or lighter, it's going to make the rest of it move differently. So if you adjust the mass on one of the body parts, it can dramatically affect your animation.
Right, animations will just break down the line.
Yeah.
You don't even know what changed. It's like, you know, I changed the drag on this weapon to something else, and then the animation of the character, the user, doesn't work anymore.
Yep.
You're kind of not like, it's not like, programming is no longer a deterministic process. It's just kind of this like very feel-based nudge and hope.
It is.
And embrace the disasters, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, to an extent. It doesn't work. If it just like falls over every single time, it's not good. But if it falls over sometimes, it's good.
If the gladiator occasionally has his arm stuck behind his back and he can't do anything about it, you know, it is what it is.
Yeah, Ruan, your honey badger is a triumph. Have you seen the honey badger in Gorn?
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't,
Oh yeah, Ruan is like up there, right there. But like,
I love the honey badger.
the honey badger is entirely an exercise in compensating for poor animation. Like, the honey badger is only ever in the game for about 2 to 3 minutes of gameplay of like what I hope would be like 5 or 6 hours of content. So I just did the legs like really quickly, and because he's like so twitchy, I just made the head twitch as well. So like it's way worse than Hunters, but the twitchiness of the head and the general insanity of the character, like his eyeballs are just like going everywhere and his jaw is like flapping open and shut all the time, are there to kind of like try and sketch a character that suits the poorness of the animation.
It looks like he huffed a bunch of angel dust and then like drank a bunch of Red Bulls. So one of the absolute most, is that an automatic thing, I guess? One of the most absolutely important things with physics animation is rigging. So this shows the raccoon character that I've got right now, shows the armature, and it shows, you know, I've rigged the raccoon armature to the mesh. If you don't get the rigging right, it's going to be super, super hard to animate in a roughly believable way.
So how close is your physics rig to your animation rig? Does each bone in your animation rig correspond to a rigid body in the physics rig?
A lot of them do. So like the ears have bones. I haven't wired them up yet, so they're just like, you know, perfectly like this all the time. So you don't have to actually inside of Unity, which is what I use. You don't have to take each of these body parts and set a rigid body and set a joint and all that kind of stuff. You don't have to do it, but you know, like imagine if your shoulder didn't move, it would look like stiff, you know. So you don't have to do each one.
I think it's interesting because you're modeling the character and then doing the physics for it. Where I have a setup where I'm an artist doing the character and I do the physics. So my physics rig does not represent the character very closely. I wouldn't say at all, but not nearly as closely as I think yours does. I think it does account for some of the like loss of detail and my style versus yours, but it's still like it's interesting.
Yeah, it could definitely do that. I try to rig everything like as if a real animator, real keyframe animator was going to actually take this and make animations with it. So creating a ragdoll is super, super, super important. How many people here have made a ragdoll from scratch before? So not very many. It's a pain. It's a big pain. But you have to start with a good ragdoll if you want to get good movement. Part of that is you need to get the what's called joint constraints right. So in Unity, you can adjust the way that the joints bend. So what this means, if you have a character in a T-pose, you have to tell the joint how far it can rotate. So what you see here is I'm adjusting that rotation. You know, if my arm... What's that?
What tool are you using to visualize?
This is a Unity 2017, I think it's 2 beta. They have built-in joint visualizing. I know. Did you know that, Josh? Yeah? Oh. Sorry, I threw one. This is an example of a happy accident where it wasn't normalizing the direction that the feet were supposed to go, so it was like going super far. But you don't want to just not use that, right? You can use that for something. Bear. Okay, so before we get into that one. Okay. So after we talked a few weeks ago, I wired up this little dude. I'm working on a new technique for walk cycles. And what you see here, these little white spheres are targets. So imagine you got a little dog, or actually you know, you can do this with bipeds as well. In fact, I got the raccoon wired up like this. You see the little white spheres. There's a target in front and a target in back. And I'm just controlling, you know, I'm telling it, go to this target, go to this target, go to this target. It's more of a hardwired way to get things to move, but quadruped walk cycles, in my experience, the way that I was doing it was super hard. So this is a lot easier. So what I do now is I'll set the targets where they need to be. And I can tweak all this in play mode, which makes it super quick to animate. And then I can...
You're using scriptable objects a lot, right? So you can, yeah, that's something that I'm not doing that I really should be doing. Scriptable objects is useful for tweaking things during play time and having those changes persist. To people who know Unity, it's similar to changing a material.
Yeah. Yeah, so so I'm working on a new walk cycle technique, and that's basically what it looks like there. So what we see here is a bear dancing. However, I'm using animation curves to control the force. So if I've got a standing force on the chest and the dude's like standing up, I can use a force multiplier, these animation curves, which this goes up to 1, goes down to -1, which imagine applying force to a rigid body, but it's doing so using that curve as a multiplier. It's going to go bob up and down, right? So I've got a bunch of different like animation curves that I use, different shapes and everything, which kind of give different behaviors. But a lot of the dancing stuff that I do, it's just tweaking these animation curves.
So that is like sorry, I'm like asking more technical questions.
Yeah.
That is like a constant force. It's not a target towards which you're applying a force, right?
So like this would be like a standing animation, a typical standing animation for physics-driven animation. If you imagine that I'm a ragdoll and I'm laying on the floor, just imagine like a real ragdoll. Like if you wanted to have it stand up, you could grab it by the chest and hold it at this height right here. So what this animation is right here is I'm just applying force to the chest to make it stand up. It's a constant force, so it's just also using that multiplier. So I could have an animation called Dance 1, and it's the same standing animation, but just using a different animation curve. I could have an animation called Dance 2, same exact standing animation, it's just using a different curve to kind of control it. Yeah. Okay, let me show you a little bit inside of Unity. I built out a physics-only animation framework. I'm not going to get super technical. I just want to give you an overview of what it looks like. Okay, so this scene right here, I think I've got. Let me see which one this is real quick. So I'm going to show you how I animate these little dudes right here. So right now that's the dog's just idle animation.
It's a lot like the honey badger actually, just like half as fast.
Yeah. So you see the little spheres by the raccoon's feet? It's the same idea as the dog. The dog's a little bouncier. So
how much of the forwards force is created by the feet actually pressing against the ground and pulling it backwards? And how much is applied to the character?
I've gotten to the point with walk cycles where I want to get the legs to look right and not necessarily worry about them actually propelling the character forward. Right? So you understand, like I want the legs to look like they should without worrying about them actually propelling like they should in real life. So with usually what I'm doing with these is I'll get the legs looking right and then I'll like do the chest or something. and I'll add a force in the direction that I want to go. You have to tweak it.
Is it possible to make the raccoon straight, like face in one direction and walk in a circle?
Yeah. Yeah, actually we were talking about that, like being able to sidestep or that kind of stuff. You could do that. I didn't build it out yet, but you could. So right now I've got front and back targets by the feet. I could easily put side targets, and I can actually use you could use the direction that the player is pressing as a multiplier based on the direction. You can kind of tweak it that way. But yeah, you could get that to work. But if you wanted to go sideways, like going sideways with the chest instead of applying that forward force, yeah, you could probably just use player input. I think I did that a long time ago, and it worked pretty good.
So you don't build it once yourself. You script this, and then it generates the ragdoll almost at runtime.
Well, so what I do, like, let's say I bring in a new character. I will create. So I can go to create, and then character profile, which will load up a blank one of these. And then I can start filling in numbers, or I can actually copy the settings from an already set up character. So if you have a character set up, you could add this, and I've got a button that just shoots it all into the character profile. So you don't have to actually go in and type everything. But the end result is you can see I've got the name of the body part. So this is the spine, pelvis. This is like the middle spine. This is the upper spine. So I'm using a string for the name. At runtime, what it does is it builds a dictionary to cache references to everything. So this profile had the body part name. This column here, do I want to add a rigid body? If so, what's the mass? I can tweak the center of mass here. Do we want to add a collider? Is it going to be a sphere, capsule, whatever? And I can set the settings there.
And those strings correspond to the names of the bones in the rig, I presume.
Yeah, and they have to match.
So clearly, you're working by yourself and not with an artist, because you can depend on the bone names being the same.
Yes.
I'm upset that none of the born artists are here now. So
I'm very happy that I'm here.
Robbie. No, you're not an artist. Okay, and then the last column here is, do we want to add a joint? To make a ragdoll, you have to have joints. So, yes, I want to add a joint. What is it connected to? And then I got a couple other things that have to do with setting the axis of the joint. That's a little more advanced, and I barely have a solid grasp on it. But anyway, so step one, set up the ragdoll. That is done by using one of these profiles. When I hit a button on the actual character, so I can actually take that profile, drop it right here, and then I can hit apply profile settings to game object, and it will build the ragdoll. So boom, we're set up. So that means I can create a profile for a raccoon. I can bring another raccoon in, and to make the ragdoll of that new character, apply the profile, hit that button, and then the ragdoll's done. Okay, so step two is I use the concept of an animation library. So load into your brain the picture of a library. Library contains books. So my animation library contains animation clips. And the reason I'm doing it this way is if I have a character, I want to be able to apply different animation libraries to that character. You could have an animation library for regular walking. You could have an animation library for drunk walking or something like that. But when you load an animation library up into a character, it creates essentially a state machine. So the state machine, you can see I've got different names. Here's the idle state. Here's the walking state, standing, knocked out, grounded, dance one. So each state, you need to tell it which animation clips that you want to use. I use...
so this would almost be part of the AI even?
Yeah, so AIs use the same exact thing. When I say animation clip, it's not the Unity animation clip that you guys are used to. I made my own, which I'll show you here in a sec. But the basic idea of an animation library is it's your state machine. If the character is in the walking state, then I want you to play these animations here. So if the character is in the dancing state, play this animation clip here. So when we look at an animation clip, it's similar to the profile. We're using a string to define the name of the body part, which on the back end, it just does a dictionary lookup to get the rigid body. As I mentioned before, I'm caching references to everything in the start method. So on the back end, what this is doing is it's looking up where the rigid body is on the character. You know, what's the rigid body, and then we want to apply force to it. This gets more involved, but all these little checkboxes here control the type of forces that I can add to a character.
I was gonna ask, so you have like point targets and just like directional and relative, yeah, I see all the relatives. So yeah, I also find that like different animations, sometimes you want to say hand follow point, so you can do something, sometimes you want to just like go in that direction, throw a punch, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So what he's describing, those are all, I call them different types of forces. So an example of the walk cycle here is, okay, I want the left foot rigid body to just go down on the y-axis, down by 111 units relative to itself. So relativity when you're doing this stuff is super important. We want to apply a force to a rigid body, but what is the direction relative to? Does that make sense? So I've got a rigid body, I want to apply force, but is that relative to like the hips? Which with a walk cycle, the way that I was doing it, is I would define forces relative to the hips to control where the feet go. So this is relative to itself. Anyway, there's different force types. Animation clips, I can plug into the animation library. I can also plug in something I call sequences, which I'm kind of trying to move over to, maybe move it over to Timeline, the new Unity feature. The idea behind a sequence, is that you can plug in a sequence of animation clips, right? So everything kind of plugs into everything else.
Why would you use Timeline over this?
I don't know.
Just like play animation, play next animation.
It might have some other functionality that I can use, like authoring and stuff.
I think I just have like a fundamental and undeserved distrust of visual tools.
Yeah. It's because you're a caveman. So an animation sequence, you can think of, Josh showed a little earlier, Timeline, where you can plug different animation clips in. You know, they walk this way, they're idle, they do the swipe animation, they turn around and walk away. It's the same concept here. These will play one after the other, or I can randomize them. So I've got a little drop down for play sequential, or I can play them in random order. This is how I do a lot of the dancing stuff. So imagine you have a character you want to dance. You can make 15 different dancing animations. You can plug them all into here. I can add as many of these as I want. And it can pull those dance animation clips at random.
So that's like kind of interesting because it's not very game-like. That's very like animation-like. In game, obviously, you want those clips to be driven by AI rather than just like play a random clip.
Yeah, but the use case for this thing is I was doing a lot of dancing stuff. So if you had like 10 characters, you want them all to dance. You don't want them all to dance the same. You could plug this in, tell it to randomly fire, and you have 10 characters who will never, ever be dancing the same at all. there's just way too many. You can adjust like the timing and stuff. You can tell it to, you know, use this clip for a minimum of 3 seconds. I've got some other like randomization and procedural kind of stuff that you can do. But also, it's a 2-track sequencer. If you think back to like audio sequencers, you have like multi-track mixers, multi-track players. I use the same concept where I've got multiple tracks. So you could have track number 1 control the upper body. You could have track number 2 just controlling the feet. And I came up with this idea when I was working on a little karate prototype, where you know how in karate you've got like, you know, different stances and everything? So I wanted the character to be able to change stances. So I would put all of the foot stance animations on one track. And then the upper body with karate, you know, you're doing all kind of different stuff. And so what it ended up with is you've got a character who's running through all these different karate moves. The feet will change periodically, while the upper body will, you know, either go through these in a sequence. You know, you can think of like doing a kata or something like that. But I prototyped some like elaborate fight scenes using this here. Super cool. I don't think I've ever showed you guys that one. It's nice.
I saw your karate stuff. It's pretty cool.
Did you?
Big karate.
Okay, so animation library, you can plug in animation clips, you can plug in animation sequences, and then I take the character and I can now apply the animation library to that character.
So, how often does your animation work on 2 different characters? Because that's another big deal. It's like these animations are really portable.
On a different character, what do you mean?
I mean, so you have this one, does this work on a raccoon and on Molly, or on a raccoon and on the bear? I mean,
no, because like Molly's the little girl that was riding the bear. Molly's skeleton's different, so her walk cycle is going to be different. A lot of times what I'll do is, in fact, I think with the raccoon, that's exactly what I did, is I took a lot of Molly's animations and I just dragged them over to the raccoon, hit play, and of course it walks all crazy because the bones are different on the raccoon. And I just went and started tweaking it like that. But like I'll probably make like different raccoons, so I'll make 4 different raccoons. So when it comes time to set those up and animate them, I'll just drag over all of the other raccoon stuff, and it should all work, right?
So long as things are named the same.
Yeah, which is like never happens in the real world.
It doesn't. So the thing that I built, it's super buggy, super janky. I have to completely rewrite the editor UI because I still don't understand how that works yet. But it works. So that's the basics of how the animation system that I built works. The good thing about doing these physics animations is it's all math on the back end. And you can have as many animation clips, physics animation clips as you want running, and they're all going to combine. The physics engine is just going to combine everything together. So you don't have to worry about blending. You don't have to worry about any of the math after you've kind of built out all your methods and everything. You can just apply whatever clips you want, and the physics engine is doing the actual animation. So what you end up with is just stuff that's different every time, and it's not always easy to control. So you wouldn't do this if you want like easy to control animations. You want to do this if you want just interesting, jiggly, or like
Keen to embrace the chaos.
Yeah, very much so. Okay, that's all I want to show here. Do you guys want to take a few questions?
You know, each person wraps up, I guess, and then a couple questions. I think, like, yeah, in closing, I want to say, like, I think Hunter's implementation is very advanced and very involved. It's like it dwarfs mine in terms of complexity and like power, which is kind of cool. But I think, like, getting started with this is a little bit simpler than it would appear from this. Like I think if you just making a ragdoll and just applying like an upwards force on the chest, and you'll have something that looks like a marionette already.
Yeah.
And I think it's just like something that's really fun to experiment with. And we talk about emergence a lot in games, and emergence has very high value. I'm not going to define it because I think everybody knows already. And I really think all the emergence that you get for free from physics animation makes it worth it over and over.
I mean, there's also, along with emergence, there's a lot of realism that you get out of it. The fact that characters aren't passing through each other, passing through walls. There's lots of times when you have traditional animation that it breaks your suspension of disbelief because you see that doesn't look real now. And if you've done it right, physics animation allows you to make a very believable simulation of action, so long as you didn't want it to be very precise. Although I think you can get it precise, that's just not necessarily the goal here. I had a question. So you said earlier, physics animations produce wonderful GIFs, and I'm wondering how much that is because it's still a little unfamiliar. It's still seeing characters in a video game and imagine yourself being able to play in that world where it's behaving believably as opposed with canned animations. That still feels novel. There's certainly things that have been, that were GIFable in physics animations in the past, like characters just exploding or messing up, and that's no longer funny, I would say now, because people have seen it. It's a trick that's been done.
Yeah, I studied this a little bit. I actually come from like a biomed background, so I got interested in exactly what you're talking about. And you actually read this in some of the game books, how to design interesting games, and it comes down to patterns, I think. Like, we're, as animals, we're wired to identify patterns. If a pattern becomes repeatable and predictable, it becomes boring. Physics animation isn't the same every time. So it's interesting, to answer your question, I think it's interesting because our lizard brains identify this as this is not a repeating pattern over and over. It's unique. It's jiggly. I'm not exactly sure where it's going to go.
I mean, I find certainly from myself monitoring my own interest in watching a physics animation in a GIF, there's a lot more I feel like I can study. I can look at it for far longer, still trying to figure out how it all works, where that doesn't apply to a set of canned animations like ever, really.
Yeah, I think that's our lizard brains that translates into what we call interesting because they're trying to figure out how it works.
So another question. I don't actually know how far over time we've already gone, but
Lots.
Terribly.
So many times.
Not like any of you guys are anywhere to go, so sit down.
I smelled weed. Did you guys start?
I did want to ask, do you see more physics animation replacing traditional animation in the future? When I say traditional, more keyframed, like film animation. I mean, I suppose that's for you as well.
Well, I think like in VR, it's non-negotiable. It's going to be some hybrid solution. Animation is always going to be animation. Like I think a well-crafted handmade animation in something like a Pixar movie is going to be first prize. But for games, I don't see, I don't see a future for canned animations or very interactive games, right? Like I'm very focused on VR, which is very interactive, and you're seeing things really close up. I don't see a future for canned animation.
Where I hope to try take it in some future experiments, some things we've tried a little bit before was using those canned film Pixar style animations as the guides, like those little balls underneath the feet of the raccoons. Use a canned animation as a goal, but then have the physics use that information and simulate towards it.
Yeah, I think Ruan and I, maybe you haven't, have this concept of are you cheating at this? So with keyframed animation, are you actually just trying to follow a canned animation with physics? However, I've been thinking about how to do a hybrid solution of that, because doing poses, doing character poses with just physics is not the easiest thing to do. Because what you have to do, if I'm standing like this, I got to set targets for each body part where they go. And in fact, like the climbing stuff that I do, I don't know if I showed. So the climbing stuff that I do, I'm setting targets for like each one of their grab positions. So like doing a pose with physics animation, it would be cool if I had a keyframed animation that was kind of the goal of that pose. So I've been thinking about how to actually do that.
And I think with your system, given that the rig already is essentially very, very close to what you'd use in film, it's rigged up in a traditional way.
Yeah.
It would be easy just to then keyframe from